Look in your eyes, and I can see a life together. Standing by you, and I think I want to forever. And after all that's come and gone through all the years, I can't believe the moment's finally here. Hey, you never looked so beautiful. You're everything I've waited for, and so much more. Standing right in front of me, and we go weather every high and low. If love is going where we go to have it home forever, let's start our life together. Let's start our life together. Let's start our life together.
Hi everyone, very big welcome. So I'm using the mic because we're zooming this online and everyone needs to listen in. But yeah, great welcome today for all of you in person and online. So I am Kerry McCrickard. I'm the Deputy Director at CHILD, the Centre for Holistic Initiatives for Learning and Development. And we're hosting this fab seminar today with Associate Professor Jason Chow. So it's my pleasure to introduce him for our seminar. So methodological and contextual approaches to understanding and supporting language and behavioural development and disorders in classroom settings. So Jason is Associate Professor of Special Education at Vanderbilt University. He's also a visiting professor with us in CHILD, the Centre for Holistic Initiatives for Learning and Development. And before becoming a fancy professor, he was a fancy school teacher, but now as a researcher and academic, he focuses on research into language, social and behavioural development, and how to promote kind of effective educator and system level collaboration to support the uptake and implementation of effective practices and programs in different settings, including schools, really the settings where children sort of spend their lives. And at CHILD, Jason plays a really important role in our evidence synthesis work stream, developing that and bringing some of the methodological kind of expertise he has in that area, as well as the work we do in interventional sort of design and implementation. So it's fab to have him as a colleague and really great to be able to introduce him here today. So before we get started, like I mentioned, we are online and we're in person. For those of you online, thank you for joining us. Please put your questions into the chat. We'll be looking at them and picking them up, and we'll come to those towards the end. For those of you who are here in person, Jason's very happy for you to ask him questions throughout, pop your hands up, and yeah, do interrupt if there's something that you want to find out more about or ask, where he's open to that. Okay? So without further ado, welcome to Jason. Round of applause.
All good, all good. Okay. How's everyone doing? Good. I see this. It's afternoon. Okay, good. All right. Well, great. Thanks, Carrie, for the introduction. Probably the first time I've had a video montage and a song right before speaking for a new group, so that was pretty cool. Yeah, as Carrie said, questions anytime, interrupt me. I think part of what I miss a lot about leaving the classroom is getting interrupted, getting thrown off, getting asked questions by my students, and so not that you play the same role here, but I do enjoy conversation during these talks because I think it's more fruitful and sort of provides an opportunity for ongoing discussion. I'm gonna get used to the system here. All right, so Carrie did sort of introduce the title of my talk. What I'm hoping to do today is provide a little bit of context for how I'm approaching some of the work that I say I, but we, my team, could not do it without them. I sort of just I get to be the one to come talk about this stuff, but it's really all because of them. Contextualize it in the US context for the sort of conditions and the labels under which the kids that we are including in our studies and trying to support are categorized, and sort of thinking about how we describe those children. And then going to talk a little bit about data from 2 studies that sort of fit into this line of work. I spent a lot of time talking with folks about intervention work to really improve outcomes for individual children, and there's a lot of good work. There's a lot of good work really focusing on changing individual child behavior, language development. I've done a lot of thinking recently about how we can think about the sort of the context under which those interventions are delivered, the context under which the children are learning, and the different factors that go into that. So I've spent the last couple of years really broadening a little bit, taking a step back to think about what's going on sort of around classrooms, in classrooms, in terms of sort of the social environment, the language environment, and the learning environment. And then really to align with some of the work that we're doing in Child right now about designing just sort of holistic interventions to support kids in classrooms, talk a little bit about a project that my colleagues are leading that I'm collaborating them with on in improving what we can do to support educators to not only focus on academics, but also to focus on social emotional development and oral language development in concert, because those things are pretty related, particularly if you spend time in classrooms with kids. You know that communication and language is quite similar often to the behavior under which they're operating. So, and then hopefully we'll have a little bit of time for some discussion, some questions at the end. So I started thinking about this work in graduate school, the relation in the literature that oral language and language processing has with challenging behavior and problem behavior in classrooms, but also at the home within these longitudinal data sets. And so children with early language delays often exhibit higher rates of challenging behavior, whether that's measured in classrooms or at the home by parents, compared to their peers that aren't sort of diagnostically categorized with a language delay. And these associations remain significant sort of concurrently, but also over time. And you think about in the work that we're doing in supporting sort of outcomes of children in public school systems who have challenging behavior, there's a lot of this talk about their potential higher elevated risk of being sort of accessing social services, and perhaps are more likely to encounter in the U.S. we call it the juvenile detention system, or the juvenile detention centers, all because of this idea that behavior is super salient and can get in the way of instruction. And so if you are in a position where you are not succeeding in school because of your behavior, there may be ways in which we can sort of think about intervening earlier to sort of prevent these more dismal categorical outcomes. You can see I'm like trying to figure out the best system here with the clicker and the mic. There you go. Okay. And so just a little more data. I'm happy to share out these slides, and I know this is being recorded, but we have this idea that this relation between language and behavior exists, is pretty prominent. And there's also some studies showing that not only just early language predicting sort of behavior challenges, but also we have growth change and growth in vocabulary producing different trajectories of inattention, hyperactivity, and emotional symptoms. And the idea here is that without intervention, so absent from intentional intervention, we are seeing that language skills remain pretty stable. Oral language is pretty hard to change if you're not trying to change it, someone's communication skills. So understanding how oral language operates in school systems and in society is pretty important when we're thinking about behavioral development, and has, for me as a former teacher, really salient in terms of success in classrooms, how these things are related. So for some context, I started teaching in a public school that was really, my role was supporting kids with what we call emotional disturbance or emotional behavior disorders, and I've just put the sort of federal definition up here for folks to see. But it's really a behavioral sort of condition or a diagnosis that has been documented and demonstrates sort of an adverse impact on educational performance and educational development. So it's not that just there's challenging behavior in the room, it's not that just kids have a conduct disorder, but it's that it's making a marked impact on their educational progress. And this is an important distinction to make because it's funded by Special Education Services in the US, or IDEA. And sort of practically, as it relates to language, you have children with EBD, or emotional behavior disorders, that consistently in the literature present lower language skills than their peers. There's this one paper, it's a meta-analysis of children with emotional and behavioral disorders in the research literature. And what was interesting about this finding, I think is really important, is that over 80% of those children presented with unidentified language challenges. So they were in the literature in research studies because of a behavioral problem or behavioral condition. This was a set of studies that also had their scores on a language measure, and 81% of those samples were categorized as having a pretty marked language delay. And we can pretty much assume that if they're in the literature for a behavior issue and they're not receiving or they weren't identified with a language delay, that they're not receiving specific language intervention for that delay. Kind of like this idea that the focus on behavior, which a lot of us who work in classrooms, observe classrooms, and support teachers in classrooms, behavior is the thing that gets in the way often, or is the most noticeable. So there's often a behavior intervention plan or a team focused on improving behavior. Oral language, our argument here is that it might be a really important but sort of secondary issue that's less salient to teachers at the time, right in the moment, but maybe really contributing to some of the academic and social maybe delays that these kids are facing later on. The other group of kids that are in our studies and that we're working with to support are children with developmental language disorder. Formerly, this term we used was specific language impairment. The National Center for Deafness and Communication Disorders, which is our primary funder at the national level for communication and language challenges. This is the agency definition, but I just highlighted the main things that I think are important. Interferes with learning, understanding, and using language. And these are language processing difficulties that you aren't explained by other conditions. So it's really the use of language and a delay in this ability that's not explained by other conditions, sort of listed there. And it's also pretty common. So we're thinking about making sure in the work that we're doing, we're really focusing on this idea of someone's ability to use language and manipulate language to communicate. And sort of on the same sort of thought train here, we have children with DLD are presenting more behavior challenges than their peers. There's a meta-analysis that shows that kids who have developmental language disorder in studies that also have a sample with peers who don't have DLD, if you measure out a year later across a bunch of different studies, the kids who have developmental language disorder in those studies are more than twice as likely to develop problematic behavior symptoms, challenging behavior, inattention, and even ADHD symptomology. Practically, this has sort of got us thinking about what does this mean for the educators in the room who are here to support these kids. I know there are speech language therapists, we have speech language pathologists, but it's a profession of educators who are tasked, at least by our federal government and funding, to support kids with developmental language disorder who are receiving special education services. They tell us all the time that they're struggling with managing challenging behavior in their workplace across their profession. And so we think about if kids with challenging behavior are presenting with language difficulties, it sort of makes sense that children with language difficulties are presenting with challenging behavior. But at least in our training system, our sort of certification, teacher training, and SLP training, that other domain isn't as much of a focus in their training, which kind of makes sense. But that's something that we're trying to sort of work through here. Yeah. And this is just for me to remember to sort of make that point where if behavior is preventing the intervention, the language intervention that these kids with language disorders need, they may not be accessing the full educational sort of corpus of services that they really need to succeed if behavior is kind of getting in the way of that intervention service delivery. And so practically, children with behavior disorders more often than chance are presenting with language problems, and children with language problems are presenting with behavior problems. So you can see this kind of theme here where there's this co-occurring conditions that we're really trying to support in both cases. Educational and learning and progress may not be as well supported or as accessible to these kids based on that other domain of development that we might not be focusing on enough. So that's just a little bit of a preview, sort of context for the sort of next couple slides and set of studies that we're going to go through. Anyone have questions so far? We're kind of talking about the same issue slide after slide. So. Okay, at any point, please do interrupt me. So when thinking about solutions, there's really great folks doing intervention work one-on-one with kids. I'm really interested in sort of what happens contextually around intervention and around those interactions to think about what are ways that we can bolster the efficacy or effectiveness of different types of practices, teaching programs, and curriculum that teachers and educators are implementing. And so, did that just move? Yep. So we're going to talk a little bit about how teachers talk, how educators talk, and the quality of that talk. To describe what kids, but particularly kids with behavioral challenges, are hearing and what linguistic environments they're exposed to in this sample is going to be preschool classrooms. And then talk a little bit about the other domain that I've been interested in a lot is this sort of social development, the social domain where we're really digging into how kids choose and make friends and who they believe their friends are and how language and behavior relate to those friendship formations. Then we will sort of take a turn to think about while this descriptive work is going on, while we're trying to understand the phenomena of language and behavior in classrooms and social development, what can we do in the meantime to really drive home some supports for educators who need them now, for parents who are interested in collaborating, and to really think about that development, both from professional development lens, but also from this sort of scientific descriptive lens here. So this is really here, this model we sort of put together because we were interested in two things. One was what type of environment linguistically is really important in facilitative of early language development and growth. And so this model here, I'll show it again a little bit later, but really what we were trying to support is kids who have and exhibit challenging behavior and what educators and classroom contexts can do to really help those kids develop both behaviorally, socially, but also with their language. And so the shaded in boxes are sort of the two domains we're really targeting with our programming. Yes, you have to have an effective classroom environment and positive behavior supports in that sort of universal tier 1 setting to really set the stage for teachers to be able to confidently and sort of consistently model and instruct with high quality linguistic environments. So this study is going to be talking about this shaded in box. This model was really just a way for some of us to organize some of our thoughts. I don't know if anyone else is like that, but when I'm thinking about all these different things, sometimes I just need to put it down on paper. The bottom pane is sort of the evidence that shows that children with challenging behavior, if you don't have access to high quality structured environments while you're learning, those sort of poor outcomes can happen. And so we're really drawing on some of the evidence for intervention components and practices that really support classroom environments and also linguistic environments. Okay, so this is the teacher talk study. So what we wanted to know, and think about kids with challenging behavior in this sense. So the kids who have been identified as having challenging behavior in classrooms, we wanted to know what they're hearing, what teachers are saying, what language they're exposed to in classrooms, and if that may be different than what the general classroom environment looks like. So in the research literature on studying classroom environments, particularly linguistic environments, we're pretty good at understanding what the classroom average looks like, because we can code a teacher's quality of their talk. We can code and measure in research like what the classroom structure looks like in organization. But we were interested in figuring out, are there differences for what individual kids experience in the same classroom with the same teacher as a function of whether or not you're one of those kids who may engage in challenging behavior, maybe a little aggressive or inattentive. And the idea here is, if we get a little bit of a snapshot into the differences and potential differences in the linguistic experiences of kids with challenging behavior in classrooms, if those differences persist over time, could that be one contribution to the potential language differences that we're seeing in these kids if they're in schools, in classrooms all the time over the years, experiencing something a little bit different than the general classroom environment is experiencing. So we have 20 teachers. This is just a very descriptive initial study. We had 20 teachers in classrooms, and they identified in their classrooms some kids that were giving them some behavioral challenges. And so in this data set, we coded 30 kids within these 20 teachers' classrooms. And you can think about the process of, we asked teachers to nominate kids for us to take a look at, to make some observations and maybe give them some support in. But really it's we're calling them target children just because we are focusing on them, not that we need to put any sort of targets on their back or anything. But teachers helped us identify the sample because, yes, we are concerned about kids who engage in challenging behavior just generally, but we're also trying to support teachers in developing their relationships with those kids. So we think it's really important that they help us identify those kids that they may want to improve their relationships with. So small sample, 20 teachers, 30 kids. This is the general codes that we were really interested in doing. So we coded videos of teachers instructing, okay? And these instructional videos were in whole group settings, small group settings, during center time, and during what I just call the kidney bean table, but that sort of elbow table where the teacher's sitting in the middle and a few kids are sitting there, usually to receive supplemental instruction. And we were just really interested in being able to differentiate who the teacher was talking to in real time in those videos, so that we might be able to isolate what those 30 kids that those teachers helped us pick out were experiencing in terms of their language input. And so these are the codes, but really you can sort of see we're trying to differentiate if, one, the teacher was talking directly to the target child. I'm going to use Carrie for this example. Talking directly to the target child. Was I talking to a child that was not the target child? Was I talking to a group that the target child was in? Was I talking to a group that the target child was in, but Carrie was disengaged, so she wasn't hearing what I was saying, okay? And a group that the target child was not a part of, right? So we're really trying to get Carrie's perspective on what she's hearing from me, if that makes sense, if I'm her teacher. And then whether, there's actually surprising a lot of self-talk. When you code teacher talk, they talk to themselves. I talk to myself all the time. So we had to really differentiate adult or self-talk and no code. And so we spent a lot of time doing this because we really wanted to, again, understand Carrie's perspective of what she may be learning from me when, even if I might be teaching really well to a group, she might be experiencing something different than somebody else. In terms of quality, we dichotomized language quality in terms of what the literature would tell us is a language supportive utterance or a language supportive statement or part of a conversation, and something that that would be categorically not so supportive, like task direction, lots of singing in early childhood classrooms, closed-ended questions and directions, behavioral directions. So for this study, we really were just separating what we might know or sort of categorize as high quality versus not. And there's a lot more to unpack here, but really for this this pilot study, we were just trying to understand generally the exposure to high quality language supportive utterances from teachers. So these are the results, and really in summary, what we wanted to sort of point out here is that if you are a target child that the teacher had identified as someone who is giving her, most of our teachers are female identifying, giving her issues with behavior, they're going to be, at least from our descriptive data, experiencing lower quality on the average utterances than children who were not identified as the target child. This has nothing, causal here. This is just very descriptive on a small sample, but really trying to get an idea of, is the linguistic experience within a classroom variable across kids? And that's what we're seeing here. Here's another way to break down the data, but if the classroom average of language supportive utterances is a light gray bar, and what the target kids heard, just based on our coding scheme, which is limited, but what we conceptualized as what the target child was exposed to, you can see is sort of across the board a little bit lower. A number of language supportive utterances. Thanks. Yeah. Thanks. I should add that. So in summary, we are trying to paint a picture of what this linguistic experience looks like in classrooms. These kids, focal children, target children in the sample, the dark gray bar, may be experiencing a different type of language environment than peers, at least within our sample. And classroom averages can really only tell us so much. Yeah, Carrie.
These counts that you've done, did you feed this back to the teachers to get them to comment on it?
Yeah, so the question from the audience was, did we feed back any of these counts and data to teachers and get them to comment on it? We are doing that right now. So we absolutely are having, and really, very graciously appreciating teachers who are helping us think about these things and why they may be doing things. These videos, we don't have the same teachers who were engaging in the instruction than the ones we're working with, and probably for good reason too. It's kind of a nice way for them to help us comment on other people's instruction. But yeah, that's a really important step for sure that we're working on with. Yeah. Okay. How are we doing? 28. So the other dimension that I'm going to talk about a study today is on friendships. Kids and their peers. This is one of the most fun, messy, enjoyable studies that I've done to date. We spent a lot of time interviewing kids, asking them lots of questions. They drew a lot of pictures for us. You can imagine a bunch of preschoolers and kindergartners drawing pictures, asking them lots of questions, and them giving us a lot of insight into their experiences in classrooms and how they view themselves and how they view each other. So to tie this to language and social development, sort of the background, again, these are the kids with developmental language disorder. So kids with DLD are often left out and have few friends during playtime. They're less assertive, and there's speech pathologists and educators reporting that they observe sort of lower levels of social competence. When you talk to the kids or measure and observe kids with DLD, we're seeing more challenging behavior, more anxiety around social interactions, and trouble initiating. You think about communication not being super strong. You may have trouble initiating, socially appropriate conversations and things like that, and making connections in classrooms. And so I put this here so I remember that these are those kids with developmental language disorder that don't have a condition, like a separate condition explaining these linguistic challenges. So these are kids where language is an issue, language processing, and that we're really trying to focus on their ability to communicate effectively. So how many people in the room are familiar with social network analysis? Okay, great. That's why I have this figure here. So this is just a really brief demonstration of how this method works. So in this, think about me in classrooms with individual kids, interviewing them, asking them questions. So in a sociogram, I would have talked and had 30 minutes with Bob, and Bob would have told me that Carol was one of his best friends, and Bob would also have told me that David was one of his best friends. When I sat down with Carol, Carol told me that Alice was one of her best friends, but did not tell me that Bob was one of her best friends. So you can see the directionality of the arrow is giving us a data set of who you think your friends are and who thinks you're their friend back. Okay? I'm sure you can all do it in the room now, and we'll get a nice little sociogram. De-identify it, though, for you all. So really what we're doing is we're again, so fun, interviewing kids and talking to them about who their best friends are. We have a protocol where we have pictures, and just to make sure that they're in the classroom that they are actually in. Some of the, a lot of kids give us grandparents' names, dogs. Someone said their best friend was a pretzel. So, we we had a lot of fun, but we really had to have a protocol to make sure that these were actually kids in their classrooms. And the two indices we're working with here is this idea of centrality, which you can think about as popularity. How many kids said I was one of their best friends? And then reciprocity, which is sort of the social dynamic part of it, is if I say that Carrie was one of my best friends, did she say it back? Because those are two different types of relationships. Yes, in real life, but also in a data set. And so really, we were sort of wondering how important is each child to a network of friendships in a classroom, and what does that mean for development? So this is the actual network plot of a classroom. This is classroom 102. I remember what school, I remember where it was, but yeah, so this, I chose this because it illustrates the phenomena we're trying to study. This is not how all classrooms looked, just to be clear. But so some of you might be able to see the greenish colored dots, but I made them yellow just so we can see them. So you see these here are kids with developmental language disorder. So they are telling other people that they're friends with them, but no one is saying it back, which, again, this classroom illustrated this phenomena, but it's not consistent. A lot of kids with DLD also had friends, had friendship nominations, but it illustrates the difference between kids who have more friends. They are more central to the classroom. They have more arrows pointing at them. They could be considered the more popular kids, right? The more central kids to the classroom network. And what we did this with, is it 20 classrooms, about 400 something kids. We identified kids at risk for developmental language disorder using the clinical evaluation of language fundamentals, a norm reference measure. Kids who we identified as at risk for DLD had significantly fewer friendship nominations. But sort of the challenging part here is that if you were a kid with developmental language disorder, the odds of someone saying that they're your friend back is 50% lower than if you didn't. So it's not for every kid with DLD, it's not for every kid that presents with language challenges, but there is a significant association between your language skill and whether or not other kids, your friends, perceive you as their friend back. And you think about the social sort of implications of that. We also did this similar analysis for children that teachers nominated as being their most challenging. So kids with EBD or presented like kids with EBD, and the same patterns hold. So this is a cross-sectional study, so this is not over time, this is not predicting later friendships, but in one sort of snapshot, kids with both challenges in both of the domains that we're concerned about right now are experiencing potentially a different social sort environment, particularly with the difference in whether or not peers also agree that you're their friend. So we are doing some work now to figure out how to not jump the gun and develop interventions on this right now, but really understand whether these associations hold and are stable over time, or if there are unique clusters of networks in classrooms that actually could be really supportive of language development. So if you are friends with kids who have high language skills, do you get good language models more consistently? And does that sort of bring up your language development scores, your language scores, or just your pro-social development? And then from the social sort of domain, if you at kindergarten don't report having very many friends, but your classroom has a lot of pro-social opportunities for interaction, does that really help your friendship networks? So those are things that we're trying to think through here. Yes. We did not. We have an analysis that we worked on about gender. We didn't have any hypotheses particularly about why this was the case. We ran this because we sort of wanted to think about individual differences. Developmentally, it kind of makes sense at kindergarten that there's this sort of maybe a little bit more. And I'm not a gender expert in terms of development, but there may be some earlier social skills that are developing that are really thinking about different types of, not behaviors, but different types of kids sort of commanding presence in social spaces. I don't know, do you have any thoughts about that? So So what this meant is on the average, the children who at least parent reported their gender was female had more friendship nominations coming towards them than boys did. Again, lots of stuff to study here. Okay, so potential findings to and its associations with practice. We're thinking about, can we work with educators to use data about language and or behavior in a supportive way that helps bring people into the fold, bring kids who are isolated in? I know that there's a group out of Ohio State, Laura Justice and her team has some work where they're really trying to identify isolates, we call them in the network, the kids who don't have super robust connections to the group, and how can we work with people to bring them into the fold when we're training teachers to notice different things. One of the things that we in the states have, I'm not sure if it's across all states, but all states that I've worked in, all children have to get a language screener at kindergarten just to identify potential need for further diagnostic assessment. Those data typically go to teachers fill out the screener, and then if someone flags in the screener, it goes to a speech pathologist or a speech therapist to do conduct a diagnostic evaluation. But those language screener data sort of resemble the data that we collected in our network study, could potentially have some informative ways for teachers to use language data. So kids with low communication skills, can we, during our center time, pair them with high language skills? Can we use those data instructionally? Not super innovative and wild and sort of complex, but those data exist anyway, and for our state's policy dictates that we collect those data. So can we use those data for other reasons that are supportive? Those are some things we're thinking through. Okay, really got to breeze through here. All right, so talking about professional development and supports. So I usually, I find the studies and the research, especially the descriptive stuff, very interesting, but I always try and come back to how I started this all, which is in classrooms with kids and with colleagues, and myself as a young sort of trainee, as a teacher, trying to figure out what we can do to. It looks different than it does up here. So what are some things we can do in the meantime while we're trying to figure out how to develop interventions off of our network analyses or code who's talking to who in complex ways? What can we do to support kids now? We have a good amount of evidence on what we can do to support kids in the language domain, but also the behavioral domain. We just sort of are trying to put it together. So what? I think I just like this one better. So I am a small part of a large team led by some folks I'll give credit to in another slide soon on thinking about the sequence of professional development. So setting up that classroom, see their figure looks way better than mine. Mine was just boxes. Classroom essentials to then sequence it into understanding real basic and thoughtful activities in early childhood, which is play and engagement, then layering in how to use language and communication in the context of play, linking in then emotions to how we communicate. So this is linking our language stuff with our behavior stuff, and setting the stage once you have sort of a foundation on good communication and helping kids communicate with language well, and then looping that into drawing the content of emotions into that language and communication, which can be in the play and engagement context, sets you up for success when you're talking and teaching kids how to interact with their peers. Okay. And so this is led by my colleague, colleagues all over the place, but we really wanted to develop a model of blended intervention. So thinking about blending language interventions that have a lot of evidence behind them with social emotional interventions. I know a lot of the child folks are thinking a lot about this. What can we do to support educators in their social emotional practices? How are we thinking about like blending these things to be efficient? Because we have evidence to really move forward with the assumption, the presumption that language and behavior are related and that we can support both at the same time, and it's efficient to do it in a sequenced manner. And so preview for this intervention that's almost done being tested, it's called Toddler Talk. This is Ann Kaiser, ML Hemmeter. I'm hidden, probably for good reason, and really a lot of this work by Dr. Jennifer Cunningham. So we this figure really sort of outlines that connection here, where we have adult behaviors that facilitate language learning, we have adult behaviors that facilitate pro-social development, and we have some overlap in the middle. And what we're trying to do is develop professional development that targets both sort of individually, also together, but sequencing them in a nice way that's palatable, that is not super overbearing. And really what we're trying to avoid is sending teachers to, okay, go to your language development PD, and a month later, the next PD day, okay, go to your SEL PD day. We want to do these things together so that we're attuning teachers to the connections that are important between these two constructs, but also being efficient about the professional development that we're providing teachers in schools. And you see that there's connections between these types of adult behaviors to general learning environments up top, but also specific high-quality dyadic interactions with their kids. And hopefully we're seeing this cascade where we have evidence predicting global outcomes and also sort of this really important relationship in classrooms, which is that dyad between a teacher and their student or their child, and then the proximal outcomes on kids' development. So this is the conceptual model that really is informing the probably more fun stuff that the team has put together. So this is really a blending of two evidence-based packages that some of you folks who might have heard of before. It's the pyramid model, ML Hemmeter, and enhanced media teaching, EMT, which is a naturalistic language communication intervention that was developed by Ann Kaiser and colleagues. Really this idea, again, of we have professional development. I'm not and I'm coming from my perspective in the States, we don't have a lot of time. I'm sure this is everywhere, but we, in our context, are struggling to find the time. Teachers want to spend time learning, and they want to spend time with each other in community learning about new things, and also building up their own skills. But it's really hard to get adequate time for them to do that in a space where it's actually conducive to learning. So again, one of these ideas is blending these things together, which is sort of that first part of the puzzle we're working towards. Effective tier 1 universal supports to then layer on additional practices ahead of that. And Dr. Bryce McLeod gave a talk on tiered systems, and one of the places that we're really situating this, which is super important, that everyone is, I think, is on board with the fact that generally effective classrooms have these essential components at the universal level, at the first tier, that everyone has access to. And we're really trying to, with this program and this intervention and these practices, to support educators to ensure that their environments, their general classrooms, are set up in a way that's conducive to them layering on additional practices, other strategies, but also individualize their instruction across the day. How are we doing? Okay. Yes? No, actually, no. So we sort of co-developed these things. What's been interesting to me in my time in Singapore, talking to different people, is a lot of people in different organizations are really thinking about the same stuff at the same time. So EASL actually came on board after the initial model was developed. This grant was funded, I think, 2020. So it's almost done. So I think they're drawing from a lot of the same practices. EASL was developed using a lot of practice elements that came into the literature, probably some of the same practices that are in Toddler Talk are also in EASL. This, the difference right now that I think is substantive is that Toddler Talk is for toddlers. So we're talking a little bit younger than the preschool classrooms that these are in. Yeah. But lots of similarities for sure. So, when talking about classroom essentials, these are just some, and the reason why the end of this is a little bit, I wouldn't say super well thought through, is because we just actually, I just got access to our sort of our beta website. So these are screenshots last night from our website, which I think did way better than the bullet point words that I had. But classroom essentials, environmental arrangements, schedules and routines, positive communication across the board, setting that universal sort of tier 1 layer of really good environment and instruction. Then working, and this is a PD model, so this is a professional development model working with toddler classroom teachers and educators, thinking about supporting educators on key foundations like play, language and conversation, building in those emotion words, and then those peer interactions. So this is a sort of a menu on our training that models that snake-looking, snake-like sort of developmental model. We're developing these sort of units, lessons to really support. First, we're talking about that sequence. First, about educators supporting child language, then blending in social emotional development on top of those interactions and those play-based situations where educators have opportunities to really engage in changing the content of those conversations to really focus on social emotional development. And so have to shout out the Toddler Talk team for this, because they're the ones that are putting this together. I am just a mere collaborator. It is a framework to support early language and social emotional development in classrooms. They're piloting it now. It draws from these evidence-based package models, pyramid model, and enhanced milieu teaching. So you can see the blending of social emotional development and behavior with academic sort of precursor, which is language. And this is sort of what our the modules that they have developed are looking like in sequence, essentials. And so I just wanted to give one example of what sort of some of the ideas through one of these modules would be. And I picked the middle one because she stood out as the cutest. Example module 3, supporting conversations and language development. We're really working to help educators be able to describe the importance of early language, but also identify those key opportunities during instruction, during the day, within and outside of routines that are common, to really promote this idea that language development is something that you can always, that's always around. Language is everywhere. Like that's one of the like bumper stickers the team wanted to get. It's like language is everywhere, language is everything. But it kind of is when we think about how we succeed in today's world. And then so they would go through a module. We talk about classroom support and supporting conversations, but really engaging educators with this level of autonomy and empowerment to be able to judge and think about communication in the classroom setting as best we can. Here's just an example of Module 3's key strategies. Each one would link to different types of activities and suggestions and videos. And again, the idea to really think about the sequence of development and empowering educators to connect and communicate, not just teach. Yes, teach, but all that stuff comes after setting a good foundation for that education and instruction. Yeah, so that was just an example of some of the content in Module 3. Here's some examples of the activities that we would work with educators through. They would be able to download these sort of really, it's not, the key here is that it's supposed to be feasible, practices that are feasible, that are not, published journal articles from an academic journal that's paywalled. This stuff is going to be free, and working with educators to think about, okay, what of these types of activities in terms of feedback and things like are going to be useful to you in classrooms. And I think to Carrie's point about, are we working with teachers to really unpack some of this information? Absolutely. After this trial, this was the pilot trial, and we have a lot to work through. But that's something that is exciting to look forward to. So, sort of in sum, because I'm almost out of time, the goal of some of these projects really is to think about educators and empower educators, but also attune them to the importance of this idea that a lot of these things are related, and that we don't have to think about things separately, and that we can take opportunities and be strategic in how to support multiple domains at the same time. And we as the research team are really we learn so much from our teachers and our educators every day. We make changes because of them all the time. But it's this idea of empowerment and autonomy, to making sure that kids in classrooms get this consistent and effective Tier 1 universal instruction. Yeah. So yeah, we are just starting, but we, I think we all, given the work that's being done at Child and Easel, have a lot to do, but we're all sort of at that point where I think we can definitely move forward with sort of the next phase of things, which is really figuring out how to align what works for teachers and educators with their kids into the context under which these classrooms and the policies under which classrooms and schools and learning operates. These are the people who do this work. I just sort of say a few ideas every once in a while and learn from them every day. They're the intervention developers of Toddler Talk, and also the folks that I do the social network analysis with. And some partners, some money. Thanks for the money. My different research labs that have helped me do this work at the University of Maryland and at Virginia Commonwealth before when I was there. And that's all I have. Thank you very much.
I don't know. Yeah. Thank you, Jason. That's brilliant. I'd love to volunteer to be an RA in one of your social network studies because that must be a lot of fun. Yeah. Any questions? There's quite a few questions online, but first, anyone in the audience like to ask a question for Jason? Yes.
Thank you very much. A lot of what you said resonated with us. We are from a social service agency. We work with children who have developmental needs, but generally we follow this. I wanted to ask about play. I think in Singapore, we are not very play-oriented as Singaporeans. We are work-oriented, and it filters down to the classroom, to families. I don't know if you've noticed that, or if you have anything to say about that. How do we encourage our teachers to be more playful in the class? How do we... my name is Mala, by the way. I'm from Tai Hwa Kwan, and this is my team. We are researchers there, right? And yeah, and in families, you know, the parents wants to teach them like 1, 2, 3, ABC, but play, how do we fit that in, or how do we help? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I can just speak off the cuff. I don't have the answer about how to change Singaporean culture to embrace play now, but I really, or in the way that we're thinking about it, I think, you know, a couple of suggestions I would give is, you know, what is the purpose of the play? And so I think perhaps attuning either the groups you're working with, the parents or the educators, that play is the context for which we can build on language supports. Play is the context which you can really isolate and identify and help kids, sequence kids into learning about engaging in conversation. And so maybe play you can either change the word or you can keep the word, but really thinking about it as a vehicle to the more maybe aligned outcomes that those teachers are interested in. Also, if there's this idea or a want for there to be more play-based activities, but maybe the teacher's not the one facilitating it, perhaps getting overlaying some of the strategies with peer play, because kids will play whether we want them to or not, right? So.
Great. So one of the questions online was related to your study of the teacher utterances. People are wondering, why isn't singing considered as language supportive in your study?
Yeah, this, you know, I think I'm not a real sort of, I don't know the brain mechanisms behind it, but there's a good amount of folks on our team who have strong opinions about this, because it's really about, if you're thinking about the kids who are singing, who are young kids, what is the cognitive exercise that's going on? Like what is happening from their mindset as they're singing a song? And is that aligned with the activities under which we would believe engage thinking, engage expansion, engage inferencing, these things that help kids develop thought, language. I don't know, but I'm not sure if there's been a study that's been like randomized kids to singing the song about puffins and like being asked open-ended questions about puffins, showing visuals about and asking them about inferencing what happens when the puffin jumps in the water. I don't have the answer to that, but I know there's folks really thinking about how singing is not engaging the same cognitive mechanisms as other types of supports. I'm looking at you, but I know you didn't ask the question.
Yeah, it's out there. Fab, any other questions from this side before I go back to online? Yeah, Emily.
Thank you for such an informative talk. So being a speech therapist by training, and I absolutely agree that behavioral, like kids with behavior issues, really hindered what we can do with those kids. So I'm just interested, whether you can draw it out for us a bit more. How does it look like for that professional development training, how does it look like to blend the language with the social emotional training? Rather than, okay, let's train language facilitation technique. Okay, let's talk about engagement. Because I think traditionally it's kind of like engage the kid, facilitate the language, let's talk about social thinking. So yeah, how do you kind of integrate the three to teach teacher that?
Yeah, I think there's the one side of things is actually getting the adults to do something, right? So to teach the teachers how to sort of sequence those activities, and then the other part of it is like, what are the effective activities to then promote language development and social behavior development. So one of the examples in that a group of speech therapists that we're working with in the U.S. were having them, and I think it's a pretty common, I know we've talked about this at another meeting, but during book reading. And so really choosing books that have not necessarily are about the social emotional concepts that you're trying to work on, whether it's fear, whether it's anger, whether it's happiness, but being flexible and helping educators know how to introduce those emotion words into stories that go beyond just the text. So I'm not sure if that's what you're asking, but really thinking about taking the key concepts and not sort of being limited by either the curriculum that you're working with, the text of a book, or the vocabulary that you had planned that day, but being able to layer on top of it these sort of general ideas and constructs of social emotional development within that academic space. I think speech pathologists are very good at their interventions and the language targets that they have planned for that day, but thinking about layering on additional things to that that have to do with those constructs of social emotional development without necessarily having to access a whole new curriculum or a whole new social story strategy or a teaching strategy. Yeah.
Oh, okay, so thanks, Jason, for the presentation. Your work is really important. So I'm more interested in the research part. I mean, the measurement of the attention distribution thing. So I'm wondering if you have validated the measurement.
Yeah. So we sort of. So like what we were able to do was to demonstrate really high reliability across independent coders for all of those 7 categories. So we can say that at least from a reliability standpoint, we are reliably able to do that. What we have not been able to do yet, because it's cross-sectional data, is to sort of tie it to different, like predicting different outcomes in terms of, the next step of that research. But in terms of validating the observational measurement protocol, we've been able to do that at least within this data set, this sample, but we haven't gone to other data sets or different samples yet.
Because you have observers for the interaction video, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering, what are the professional level of the observers?
Yeah, so these observers were PhD students in special education and PhD students, one PhD in speech pathology.
Mm-hmm. So do you think there would be any potential bias if they know the children has risk of DLD or something?
Yeah, I mean, they didn't know. Yeah. So they were sort of masked to who the target child was. They might be able to infer, but at least from we tried to do sort of prevent them from making assumptions as best we could. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, thank you so much. So that brings us to time, but we've actually got coffee and things set up in the room opposite, so we can have a few more questions. Jason will be around for maybe 15 more minutes, so everyone here can enjoy that. And for those people online looking at the camera, thank you so much. There's quite a few other questions. We'll let Jason take a look, but thank you for logging in. This recording will also be available at some point in the future for anyone that wants to re-watch and the like. But thank you, and thanks to Jason.
Look in your eyes, and I can see a life together. Standing by you, and I think I want to forever. And after all has come